Stuart Young, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South, Senator the Honourable Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. I was just talking to Scotty a few minutes ago, yes. The Honourable Stuart Young, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, Senator the Honourable Amory Brown, and myself. Just to give you an idea as to what we will be dealing with today, the Honourable Stuart Young will be dealing with matters as it relates to NGC and SIS, Lifesport. The Honourable Senator, the Honourable Amory Brown, will be dealing with matters as it relates to Venezuela, and I will be dealing with matters as it relates to First Citizen Bank and the CU, fentanyl, issues relating to the book grant and late payments. So I'll now like to invite the Honourable Stuart Young, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, and good afternoon to all members of the media, wider viewing public of Trinidad and Tobago. As the Honourable Leader of the Opposition preluded, I am going to be dealing today with NGC, and in particular NGC and SIS. It was only recently that I called upon the government to be fully transparent with the population of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to an arbitration that has been taking place for quite a while, 8 to 9 years, between NGC and SIS. In March 2014, the UNC government had awarded a contract to SIS for $162 million US, approximately 1.1 billion TT dollars, to design and build a water recycling plant at Beetham. You all know it as the Beetham wastewater plant contract. And from the outset, the award of this contract, and there were allegations surrounding it that there was corruption with respect to the bids and who got the highest bid or the lowest bid and these types of things. Nevertheless, they awarded it to SIS. The works were supposed to be completed by October 22nd, 2015. The UNC government paid SIS in cash from NGC's coffers, a mobilization advance of approximately $34.4 million US, which was 226 million TT dollars, at 20% of the contract sum. Of course, the regular and normal mobilization is 10% of a contract. So immediately at the outset, you had the UNC government taking cash from NGC, doubling the mobilization fee and paying that to SIS, 226 million TT dollars. Furthermore, the original contract stated points at which SIS was supposed to repay these sums to NGC as work was carried on and done. The UNC government amended that contract to push back the date of the repayment of the 226 or the utilization of the $226 million to a point in time way after it was originally supposed to happen. And of course, the repayment never came, nor was the value for work ever deducted from the sums of money that NGC continued to pay. NGC issued a notice of termination on this contract on the 20th of November 2015, which was, of course, under the PNM administration. We came in September 2015. This was only done after SIS indicated that it had underbid on the project and said that it was demobilizing from the work site. So when the PNM came in September 2015, one of the first things SIS did was say they underbid on the project, they wanted more money that it was originally contracted for, and they began to demobilize and take all of their equipment off of the site. They began to distance themselves from completing the works on September 14th, 2015. The general election was 1 week before, on September 7th, 2015, and they started to demobilize by October 2015. By the time SIS was terminated, it had been paid $121,745,000 US, approximately 853 million TT dollars, which was supposed to represent 75% of the work completed. This was paid out of NGC's cash. On the 23rd of December 2015, NGC went to court, again on a PNM government's directions, and obtained an interim freezing order, freezing $180 million of SIS's assets. And I remember it at the time, because I was the one directing these things. We had found that assets were being shipped from Trinidad to the United States and being put to auction in the United States. So it became apparent to us that there was a liquidation starting to take place by SIS. Immediately, we instructed lawyers to go to court, and they successfully obtained an injunction freezing SIS's assets up to the tune of $180 million in December 2015. There's been extensive litigation related to this matter since late 2015 to protect NGC, the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by extension. There were court proceedings all the way to the Privy Council, where NGC succeeded in setting sham transactions aside. Because what SIS did is, with another company called Rainforest Resorts Limited, they gave 4 mortgages and a debenture to this shelf company, a company that had no assets. And again, NGC had to go to court to set these aside. It went all the way to the Privy Council. And it was on February 20th, 2020, in civil action of 2015-04374 between NGC, SIS, and Rainforest Resorts, Madam Justice Joan Charles set aside these mortgages and the debenture, calling them sham transactions. So again, this was done to protect the taxpayers and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And the court held that these were sham transactions, set them aside. There was complex and extensive litigation, but NGC was successful and ensured that it continued to freeze SIS's assets to the tune of $180 million. I'll provide at the end of this a handout capturing all of these facts, right? NGC commenced arbitration proceedings against SIS in 2016, where it sought inter alia to recover sums of money that it claimed were overpaid to SIS, plus other costs incurred subsequent to the termination of the contract. SIS counterclaimed in the arbitration that it was wrongfully terminated and claimed that NGC owed it money. Those arbitration proceedings, ladies and gentlemen, took place over the last 9 years, being prosecuted by NGC under PNM administration. Our policy was to protect the taxpayers and to pursue hundreds of millions of dollars that were paid and no value provided. The arbitration and its results, the decision, are and have to be in the public's interest. The outcome has to be of interest to us, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. On August 16th of this year, a couple weeks ago, I called on the government and the current board of NGC to advise us, the population, as to whether NGC was successful in the arbitration. In fairness to the government and this new board of NGC, we allowed them the opportunity to respond, to provide the details to the population, to say whether NGC or SIS won this arbitration and what was the outcome. Of course, there's been crickets, radio silence, no response whatsoever. Today, I tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago, it is our understanding that the decision in the arbitration was handed down on or around the 1st of August, 3 weeks plus ago, and that NGC was successful. I'm asking the government today on your behalves and the board of NGC whether it was found that SIS was properly terminated and whether it was found that there was an overpayment to SIS of approximately $49 million, which is 343 million TT dollars, an overpayment found by the arbitrator, an overpayment to SIS of $343 million that must now be turned to the taxpayers and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Further, was it part of the order that costs incurred after the termination are also to be paid by SIS to NGC in the sum of millions of dollars? And this is in addition, of course, to legal costs being awarded. Furthermore, it was shocking to me that there is a current board member. I'm asking the question, is there a current board member of the NGC appointed by the UNC government who was part of the over-certifying of payments to SIS for this Betham wastewater plant? Is there a current board member of the NGC appointed by this UNC government who was a person certifying overpayments to SIS with respect to this Betham wastewater plant that we now know was properly terminated, and an arbitrator has awarded that hundreds of millions of dollars are to be repaid to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? Ladies and gentlemen, once again, it is the PNM government who pursued this on your behalves, and it is a PNM administration's policy with respect to corruption, allegations of corruption, and the pursuit of white-collar crime, that today we can ask this government that is in place now on the current NGC board, what are they going to do about the recovery of these hundreds of millions of dollars on your behalf? And also, why is it that they did not tell the population this was the result of the arbitration? The second point I'd like to raise is with respect to a recent decision of the High Court on July 23rd, 2025, and this is between the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago and the former directors of the sport company. This is part of the Lifesport debacle. On the 23rd of July 2025, the Honorable Justice Rahim gave a decision that should be a warning for all of those who are now on boards who can find themselves in similar situations. The court in this matter related to Lifesport has found that those former directors and some of the executive management are liable to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in that the decision that they carried out, and this judgment speaks to it, instructions from the Ministry of Sport with respect to Lifesport to award a sole select contract to a company called eBeam. Rewind a little bit. Months before this decision, Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago was successful against eBeam, a company owned by a Mr. Daniel at the time, who is now deceased, where a sole select contract of over $30 million was directed to Sport TT to be given, and the services were never provided. The court ordered in that matter that eBeam should repay Sport TT $30 million. This is the follow-up. Again, it was a PNM government that decided to make sure that the law was upheld. The directors were found liable. In that, instructions came directly from the Ministry of Sport to use sole select, a company. They were told who is the company, not even told to use just a sole select tender process. They were told, use eBeam. This is what you're to award. This is what it is for. And the court has found that directors should not take those types of directions. They have a duty to the companies of which they are directors. They have fiduciary duties. And this now is a landmark case. So I'm warning, we, the PNM administration, are warning all of those who now hold board positions. If you are given instructions by those outside of the company to do certain things that you have concerns about, to break the law, and now you have public procurement law in place, which makes it even more onerous, you will be held personally liable. So that is another example. We pursued on 2 occasions corruption related to Lifesport, and the PNM administration was successful in both. with respect to these matters. There are other matters in court right now. These are civil matters. And I'm asking the population to keep a very close eye on the EMBD matters, where there are serious allegations of corruption. You had a judge at first instance, then Justice Abood in 2020, August 2020, finding that there were allegations of corruption that needed to be answered. The matter went all the way up to the Privy Council. Privy Council rejected some of the appeals. Defenses were supposed to be filed. And if the government believes that they can just discontinue these matters and sweep all of these allegations under the rug, the population of Trinidad and Tobago should be concerned. It is of note to us as well that what happened is the current chairman of NGC, an attorney at law, came out a few weeks ago, and I suspect it is because they knew, or this decision of NGC SIS was on its way to start shouting about millions of dollars in fees being paid to the attorneys. The first point is, I found it quite ironical and hypocritical that that particular individual was speaking about feeding on the trough by lawyers. And I remind you, in the period 2010 to 2015, that individual sent 2 invoices to the state and state bodies for $1 million each. One invoice, $1 million for a pre-action protocol letter, the current chairman of NGC, and another for $1 million for a statement of case. There is no way that a pre-action protocol letter or a statement of case could ever cost $1 million each. But that is the type of individual we're dealing with, and the individuals we're dealing with. Very briefly, it was quite timely that yesterday, NGC published its financial statements for the year ended 2024, 31st of December. And I'm hearing it all over the news about the success of NGC and how it's made $1.6 billion in profit and how well it has done and the turnaround. I just wanted to point out to the population that is for the year ended December 2024. All of that, again, is as a result of the P&M policies, the work we did, and all that we brought home. And one only needs to read, again, quite ironic, the chairman's report signed by a Mr. Gerald Ramdeen, where they talk about all of the success NGC had and how they recorded a profit after tax of $1.6 billion. And this represents a vast and welcome improvement of the loss of $2.9 billion from a reported loss of $1.3 billion for the previous year, 2023. And he goes on to say the loss recorded in 2023 was principally as a result of impairment charges of $1.8 billion. That loss was as a direct result of the work done by the UNC in 2010 to 2015, where they negotiated a bad contract for NGC, and NGC continues to have losses in the billions of dollars. It goes on to talk about why it was successful. The restructuring of Atlantic Trains 2 and 3 became effective on the 1st of October 2024, which represented a new opportunity for NGC to sell cargoes of LNG. Never happened before. Again, that is the work of the previous P&M administration, who from 2018 to December 2023 negotiated with BP and Shell for the restructuring of Atlantic LNG. One of the things, apart from higher gas prices, we managed to negotiate on your behalf was we also negotiated a shareholding in Trains 2 and 3, where we can now get cargoes for 2 and 3. And that is one of the things that is bringing success to NGC today. Again, pure P&M policy and competence. They go on to talk about Beachfield Manatee upgrade in 2024, which is going to be used for Shell Manatee. Again, that was P&M policy. And when you read through this, everything in here, they talk about Project Lara and the first industrial scale solar park at Brechin Castle, NGC. Again, P&M policy. And the first LNG cargoes from Atlantic Trains 2 and 3 following the commercial restructuring exercise. The achievement of National Energy Corporation in being awarded the best government initiative for its green hydrogen pilot plant project. It was the P&M cabinet that took the decision for us to pursue these things. So ladies and gentlemen, it is important that as we monitor NGC, we understand its success and its turnaround is due to the work of the previous administration. And I will end on the NGC point on this note. NGC will only be successful once there is gas for it to sell. NGC is going to have serious difficulties based on the policy decisions that this current government has taken to walk away from cross-border gas. You would recall the Prime Minister immediately on her swearing in saying Dragon is dead, and immediately talking about Grenada, Guyana, and Suriname. We now know that none of those will come to fruition anytime soon, if ever. So ladies and gentlemen, NGC has to be carefully looked at, and now that it has positive cash balances in the billions of dollars once again, let us continue to monitor it and make sure that what happened in 2010 to 2015 does not happen again, and it becomes a nest egg of corruption by the current administration. The last point I raised, because the media had reached out asking about it, is this debt that is owed to NGC by TNTech to about $7 billion. That is something that we grappled with. That is something that necessitates government intervention, and we will be looking on with interest to see, because when we came in 10 to 15, we inherited billions of dollars in debt in that area. The government has come out and said that they're not increasing electricity rates, which I understand is a policy decision. They must now look at how is TNTech going to repay that debt that NGC is carrying. Those are the matters that I came here to raise today, and I thank you. Thank you, Leader. The Leader of the Opposition would like me just to touch on the EMBD matter, as I did earlier. It is really to caution that there's civil matters in the court with respect to EMBD, including a claim against the current Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. These matters are supported by substantial evidence, including forensic evidence, including evidence where there's been a following of money and money payments. If you ever got sight of those pleadings that have been filed in that matter. And we're asking that the population pay close attention to this matter and make sure that it is not swept under the carpet. Make sure that it doesn't just disappear. Make sure that no false advice is given to discontinue it. Because like the other matters where we've met success, be it OES, be it NGC versus SIS, be it Lifesport, in the civil matters that we filed, this is yet another one that, based on the evidence that is present, should be pursued on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson. I recognize the presence of Member of Parliament Nyan Gatsby-Dolly and my colleague, Member of Parliament Stuart Young, who just presented. My task is to raise just two issues with you, members of the media and the national public of Trinidad and Tobago. But they are two major issues impacting today's headlines and impacting the public attention, attracting the public attention at this time, and rightfully so. The first is the government's reaction to a comment that was made in Washington, D.C. about Trinidad and Tobago in response, apparently, to political protests that were taking place in that city. Never in a million years would I have imagined that a foreign official would speak disparagingly about this country and a government minister would give approval or endorsement to those disparaging comments. It was bad enough when they ill-spoke this country when they were in opposition. It is far worse when they endorse negative comments about this country while in government. But it's even worse than that when the minister with responsibility for external affairs, and now the prime minister as well, is have been endorsing these comments. Listen, we have no army really to defend the good name and image of this nation. We rely on our diplomats, our representatives, and government ministers and officers of state to defend and uplift the national brand and image at all times. And our foreign minister in particular is the custodian of our brand in overseas engagements. This really cuts to the core of his duties. I didn't think he would go as low as he did when he had boldly declared that he'd found an immediate solution to the UK visa imposition, and that was many months ago. But here we are, applauding as Trinidad and Tobago was used as a negative example in a domestic political exchange in another country. And I think he went so far as to say that he was unbothered by the negative references. Unbothered? But I have a lesson today for compatriot Minister Sean Sobers. The lesson is this. In foreign affairs, even if you're responding to a negative, you can create a positive, particularly if your response is diplomatic and prudent. You see, the Western media houses give significant coverage to the words of senior officials in Washington, D.C., and they also would give significant courage to global reactions to those comments. So instead of merely applauding when a negative is used about Trinidad and Tobago, we should be saying this, and I'll give an example. We in Trinidad and Tobago heard the name of our nation being used in another capital as an example of high crime in response to protesters. But listen, that is not the full picture about us and who we are. Yes, we have challenges with crime like many other countries, but we also have many advantages and assets. We have many advantages and assets in Trinidad and Tobago. We may not be a superpower like you, but we do have some superpowers, such as our diversity, our creativity, the greatest carnival in the world, the greatest street food in the world, such as doubles, and you can really pile on the positives. So that's really a way that you can take a negative, turn it into a positive, and ride the media coverage, as opposed to merely applauding or saying that you're unbothered when the name of your nation is used in such a negative reference. And in that way, we could be actually positively covered by CNN or The Daily Show or Colbert Report or wherever else, or even Fox News. We should never applaud or be unbothered when our nation's name is becoming a negative caricature in any foreign political discourse. The right-thinking and patriotic citizens of this nation have been speaking out on this issue. We heard loud and clear the excuse from Minister Sobers that, well, he thinks the Vice President was talking about the PNM, the PNM Trinidad and Tobago, or the Trinidad and Tobago of the PNM. Now, what is that? Is that a serious comment from a government and a cabinet minister? And here's another lesson for him. There is no such thing as the Trinidad and Tobago of the PNM or the Trinidad and Tobago of the UNC. We have one nation here, a united Trinidad and Tobago. And when serious countries engage with us or reference us, they are engaging with the state and not any political party. So leave those references to our domestic discourse. And when engaging with others, there is no PNM and UNC Trinidad and Tobago. So it's no good to justify any negative references to this country on the basis that you can read the mind of a foreign official in a foreign capital and draw a conclusion that it was a reference to a PNM Trinidad and Tobago. That is unintelligent, and it does no good to the national standard and the national image overseas, of which you are the custodian. Now, the other significant issue relates to the three distinct and differing positions from within the government of this country on the issue of Venezuela and the U.S. deployment of significant naval assets at this time. These assets include 3 guided missile destroyers and several other very powerful military vessels. Minister Sean Sobers, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, and former PNM Minister, now Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to CARICOM, Mr. Ralph Maraj, all gave in the space of about 24 hours 3 bizarrely different takes on this particular issue. And we are left, the national audience is left, and the regional audience is left to try to decipher a cogent and coherent foreign policy from 3 contradictory positions. Minister Sobers said, hands off, we are neutral, we're not getting involved in that. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar gave her full support and endorsement to the U.S. deployment at this time. She went a bit further, which I'll describe shortly. And, well, Ambassador to CARICOM, Ralph Maraj, spoke in some detail about regime change in Caracas. Very unusual. Now, he's not ambassador to Caracas, you know. He's ambassador to CARICOM. He's not talking about CARICOM. He's talking about regime change in a sovereign neighboring state. In reality, what these 3 officers of Trinidad and Tobago have been doing is making a mockery of generations of hard work that has gone into crafting and building a credible and respectable foreign policy for this, our beloved nation. You'd recall the words of Errol Barrow, who's one of the founding fathers of CARICOM, along with Dr. Eric Williams, Forbes Burnham, and Michael Manley. We must be friends of all and satellites of none. Friends of all and satellites of none. That is not an anti-American position. And I hope the government is listening clearly. That is not an anti-American position. That is a pro-CARICOM position. That is not an anti-American position. That is a pro-Trinidad and Tobago position. In international affairs, we have always been punching above our weight class. But now under this government, we are punching ourselves and our CARICOM colleagues as well. Now look how the Prime Minister dismissed CARICOM in his statement. And this really was extremely unfortunate. It was a very poorly crafted statement in general, lots of repetition and littered with grammatical errors, but one line really jumps out. The Trinidad, and I'm quoting, the Trinidad and Tobago government has not engaged and has no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. She is speaking as the Prime Minister of a founding member state of CARICOM and also the Prime Minister with lead responsibility for regional security in the quasi-cabinet of guess where? Of CARICOM itself. That is a repudiation of her duties and responsibilities to our regional family. The Trinidad and Tobago government has not engaged and has no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. And she goes on to declare very boldly, recklessly, and completely out of place, each member state can speak for themselves on this issue. In other words, every country for themselves. Who is she to make such a declaration? Especially when we in this country have worked so hard to uplift and build the profile of the very same CARICOM. And we've always taken our responsibilities extremely seriously. Clearly, she is not. So I really we as an opposition have to condemn in the clearest possible terms those words and the disregard the Prime Minister of this nation is showing to the Caribbean community. And it's really unfortunate because, and I have to say sinister, because even as that statement was being released by the Prime Minister, there are efforts underway to mobilize CARICOM to examine these very issues toward building a consensus. So what she has done there over 24 hours ago is to fire a shot across the bow of CARICOM solidarity and literally sabotage our region's ability to form a consensus and craft a united position on this very significant matter. As we speak, the COFCO, the Council basically of Foreign Ministers of CARICOM member states, is being assembled in an emergency meeting to treat with this very issue. When 24 hours ago, the Prime Minister of a founding member state has said, we have no intention of engaging CARICOM on this matter. Each member state can speak for themselves. And we will have some more to say about that in the future, but we want to underscore how reprehensible that statement was and those comments in particular. Remember, this same Prime Minister basically sold us down the river a few months ago when she publicly stated that we have adopted the policy of Washington, D.C. when it comes to relations with another sovereign state. Our policy is their policy. Again, these are unprecedented times with respect to how Trinidad and Tobago conducts itself in regional and international diplomacy. That was unnecessary and completely undermines our sovereign identity as a member state of the United Nations. And I'm glad we have the presence of the distinguished leader of the opposition today, because we need to remind this government that the last cabinet approved Trinidad and Tobago's candidature for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. That campaign is due to kick off very shortly. A successful campaign is supposed to elevate Trinidad and Tobago's voice and perspectives as a participant and a broker in peace and diplomacy around the world. That's what that campaign is about. Can this current government and Prime Minister do that with that reckless and ill-conceived, ill-advised policy or policies? What is our perspective? Is it that of a satellite state? Which version of our policy would we be taking to the Security Council? The foreign ministers, Ralph Marajas, or Kamla Persad-Bissessers? And we're forced to ask the question, who exactly is advising the Prime Minister on these matters? Where's the advice coming from? Is it coming from Port of Spain? These are valid and important questions, members of the media. And we saw phrases being used, such as, in that reckless statement, such as Trump derangement syndrome tantrums. That's not Trinidad and Tobago language. Those references don't form part of our media or public or even social media discourse. So we have to pay attention when the Prime Minister of our country is using phraseology such as that. Really, really bizarre. Trump derangement syndrome tantrums. I'm just quoting. Where's this advice coming from? The irony is that Trinidad and Tobago, on the eve of campaigning for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, where we are broker now in international peace and diplomacy, has gone completely silent on the important issues of our times. completely silent on tariffs and their impact on fellow small island developing states, SIDS, completely silent on Gaza, completely silent on Haiti, silent on visa restrictions against the government of Grenada, silent on the unilateral embargo against the Cuban people, silent on sanctions and attacks against the ICC, and silent on all the other important issues of our times. We can talk a little bit about the lack of patriotism of this UNC government, but I think we'll reserve that for some comments a little later on. But I invite the media to go onto the website of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. It's available right now. And look at, under the caption, the foreign policy of Trinidad and Tobago. It's in black and white. And I can tell you that the pronouncements and utterances the current Prime Minister and the current government are at variance with the foreign policy of the very country that they were elected to lead at this time. What is their policy towards CARICOM? We see that there's no, first of all, there's no ambassador to Caracas at this time. There's no High Commissioner to Ghana. There's no ambassador to the United States of America. There's no ambassador to the Organization of American States. But there's an ambassador to CARICOM who's not talking about CARICOM, who's not talking about the CSME and free movement and the other priorities that we've helped build and fashion and design, but talking about regime change in Venezuela. Just to conclude, I saw some comments that maybe AI helped craft the Prime Minister's release. I'm not sure, because even if AI had been used, I would have expected some reference to international law in a statement like that from the Prime Minister of a country. Some reference to the United Nations Charter. Some reference to the OAS Charter. Some reference to respect for territorial integrity. Some mention of the principle of non-interference and non-intervention in the sovereign affairs of another member state. Some mention of Parliament being consulted on the issue of foreign troops, permission to be granted for foreign troops to be stationed in Trinidad and Tobago on our soil. Some reference to Trinidad and Tobago's role within CARICOM. And I want the media and the public to spare a thought for our representatives and diplomats who are overseas at this time, seeking to represent the same Trinidad and Tobago, who are under strain to interpret and explain these varying and reckless pronouncements to overseas parties, bodies, organizations, and member states. They are under pressure due to the recklessness of this government. How do you explain and interpret these things? Right here in Port of Spain, I can tell you that there are members of the diplomatic corps who are amazed and befuddled by what has been taking place and the general naivete coming from the government of Trinidad and Tobago on this matter. And I have to keep asking, who is advising them? You all would remember an issue that we spent a lot of time on with reference to the OPVs, the offshore patrol vessels. Now, you may ask, how is that relevant today, Dr. Brown? Well, it is very, very relevant, because I checked. And at the time, these were the words of this same Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, when she canceled the OPV contracts. You'd remember those vessels were part of Trinidad and Tobago's response, indigenous response, to coordinate with CARICOM colleagues in pushing back against the same drug and narcotics efforts taking place. I quote, "Do we need 3 OPVs?" This is Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar at the time. "Do we need 3 OPVs? The country is not at war out in the seas. The country is not at war out in the seas. The country is at war on the ground, in our streets and in the towns within Trinidad and Tobago. The money could be better spent on education and money for the police. That's the same UNC that is now clapping and cheering for, well, it's not 3 OPVs. There's the USS Gravely, the USS Jason Dunham, and the USS Sampson, and several other large foreign military assets being stationed in the Southern Caribbean to do what? To combat drug trafficking, according to the dispatch from the United States government. So I hope you can see the clear irony in the position and words of the Prime Minister then and her position and words now, because apparently there's a war out in the seas now that she's in support of. Unintelligent, inconsistent, unreliable, and lacking in credibility with respect to the use of marine assets to deal with the drug trade. I've just described the United National Congress. There's a lot more that I could say. The last reference I would make is to Guyana, because I think the Prime Minister thought she was being clever. In the middle of all the cheering and clapping along, she included a little paragraph on Guyana. I think trying to say that a lot of this is about supporting Guyana. Well, we say yes to support for Guyana, and we've always been in strong solidarity with our fellow CARICOM member state, not in any unilateral guns of the Navarone style, but rather to work within the ambit of CARICOM, of which Guyana is another founding member, and with the Secretary General of the CARICOM Secretariat and with the government of Guyana on these challenging issues together. I would have expected a responsible Prime Minister in the current circumstances, given her role within CARICOM on security, regional security, to have convened in collaboration with the chairman of CARICOM a special meeting to generate a CARICOM position and response to recent developments. Instead, she's doing the exact opposite. That would have been a more responsible, prudent, and effective approach, as opposed to unilaterally, without even being asked, announcing via megaphone diplomacy, which is a particular style that has arisen in recent times. Megaphone diplomacy, basically announcing the availability of our shores for a particular type of military deployment. Never would we have imagined that Trinidad and Tobago would find itself being represented in such a reckless, uncoordinated, and ineffective manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the two issues that I have been detailed to share with you. And I now hand over to the distinguished leader of the opposition, the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Roberts.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. So I don't like to start with sad news, but it's important to inform the country that Dr. Lenny Christendarth Sate passed this morning. Dr. Sate, as you know, entered politics, as I recall, around 1987, when the People's National Movement was actually in opposition. And Dr. Sate was an engineer by profession. He chaired the People's National Movement. And Dr. Sate was very soft-spoken, but very humble, extremely effective. Dr. Sate served in the ministries of the Office of the Prime Minister, Ministry of Planning and Development, Ministry of Public Administration, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Ministry of Trade and Industries, and he was also the leader of government business. He received the Eric Williams Medal of Honor, and to his wife, relatives on behalf of the People's National Movement, and no doubt the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we extend our condolences as someone who served Trinidad and Tobago as a very humble but as a very dedicated and committed person. So I wanted to start because, I just found that out and it was important to make that statement. The other thing is that it's very difficult for me, whether I go to the market, to the grocery, to not encounter the average person who is complaining about late payment of their salaries. As a matter of fact, the Honourable Member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West, the Honourable Stuart Young, just a while ago when we were talking, just before this press conference, mentioned that in seeing members of the public, several of his constituents are coming complaining about late payment of their salaries. It is one thing to have sent home more than 30,000 persons, and it's another thing for the average person, the MTS worker, the daily rated worker, those working in local government, pensioners, days later after the end of the month, to be receiving, when you go, you know how difficult it is for the average person to go to the bank, and you have no money. So we are calling on this government to ensure that people receive their salaries on time. We are in the month of August. We are coming to the end of the month. We know very well that the average parent, and some of them living basically day to day, week to week, and to go and not receive your salaries and not get any indication that you're not going to get your salary, because daily rated workers were supposed to get paid last week, they were supposed to get paid on Friday, and they have not gotten paid. I am sure that all ministers receive their salaries on time and in the bank. So please, to the government, whatever is the reason that the Ministry of Finance is not able to pay salaries on time, we are calling on them, please, pay salaries on time. The other matter that is related to that is the issue of book grants. And again, as members of Parliament, speaking a while ago, and I know the Honourable Member of Parliament, Dr. Nian Galsby-Dolly, raised this, I think it was 2 weeks ago. But here again, many of our constituents who applied, because I know this process was put in place since last year, and yet still we find ourselves in the month of August where the book grants are yet to be distributed. The government gave an additional week, so maybe that's the reason why, so they can put their house in order, and we are calling on the government to ensure that the book grants are distributed. Now, on behalf of the People's National Movement, we want to extend condolences to the family of Richard Cooper, who passed. He was one of those persons employed with the reforestation program who committed suicide. He lost his job and found himself in difficulties. And I hope this government understands the consequences to some of the average persons who can't always deal with the stress of having to face the market, the grocery, and having to go home very often to your wife and children and not able to provide the basics. The next matter I want to address is the issue of First Citizens Bank and Karen Darbesi, the CEO. Now, in the public domain, what is becoming customary with this government is that every time there is an issue, you have 3 and 4 different versions of what exactly is transpiring. So that we have the board indicating that Ms. Darbesi went on leave. We have in the public domain that Ms. Darbesi was asked to resign. What we do know is that Ms. Darbesi has gone on vacation. But let us ask the government to make it very clear whether or not the CEO resigned to the minister in the Ministry of Finance. We also are aware in the public domain that there is information that the Attorney General was asked to review her package. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves, because what we are very, very clear on is that First Citizens Bank is under the Companies Act. The Board of Directors of First Citizens Bank is solely responsible for matters as it relates to employment at the bank. And this government is clearly giving unto itself powers that it does not possess. So Corporation Sole is not an employer. We know that under the Financial Institutions Act and under the Securities Act, that the government does not have the power to do what they are doing. The CEO is not an employee of the state and therefore cannot tender a resignation to the state. The Honorable Minister of Finance or the Minister in the Ministry of Finance therefore cannot accept the resignation of any employee. We know that First Citizens Bank is a listed security and a corporate body. The CEO reports to the board, and any matters as it relates to employment is for that of the board. Now, First Citizen Bank has become a household name, so many persons may not remember that under the Patrick Manning administration, the First Citizen Bank was established after 3 failed indigenous banks. And First Citizens Bank has been doing very well. And this government needs to know that it is unacceptable to intrude into the affairs of one of the government's leading financial institutions. When you think